Entering his senior season, what does Ryan Nembhard need to do to pass his brother Andrew's legacy in a Gonzaga uniform?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. It's the dog days of summer. The sports aren't sportsing like we want them to, but folks, this summer FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, it is Mailbag Monday today. As we are in August, the middle of the Olympics, we're going to talk plenty about that at the end of the show. We got some fun questions about the new scholarship limits in college athletics, what that means for Gonzaga, not just from a basketball side, but from some other sports as well, what it might mean for redshirting in general in college athletics. We'll talk a little bit of conference realignment, all sorts of fun stuff today. We are leading off the show with this question here from the Heartland Zag on Discord, who says, going back to your great transfer episode, what do you think Ryan Nembhard needs to do to pass or match his brother's legacy? Yeah, for those of you who missed it, Friday's episode of Locked On Zags, we ranked the top 12 transfers in Gonzaga basketball history. It was D1 to D1 transfers, which I do believe I mentioned at the beginning of the show, but I may have forgotten to mention that. I got a handful of people responding, asking about JP Bautista. Why was he not on the list? He was not a D1 to D1 transfer. That was why he was not included, for anybody still wondering about that. But we did have both Ryan and Andrew Nembhard on the list. I believe Andrew was 5th and Ryan was 8th on the list. Obviously, this is based on Ryan's one season in Gonzaga up to this point. Graham Ike was on the list at number 7 as well. Two players who could both conceivably and likely move up that list depending on how this upcoming season goes. And in particular for Ryan, the question is, can he surpass his brother Andrew's legacy in a Gonzaga uniform? And I think that's an important distinction here for a couple of reasons. One, I don't believe that Ryan is as likely to be an NBA player at all, or certainly to have the same kind of success in the NBA as his brother Andrew. And that's not a knock on his talent. It's a simple fact that he is much smaller than Andrew, and the NBA values size more than I think it ever has in the league's history. And so for Ryan, who's listed at 6 foot and I think is barely that, I just think that's going to be an inhibiting factor for him. Likewise, we're not really factoring in their previous careers, previous college stops. For Andrew, he was great at Florida, but they didn't have a lot of success as a team. For Ryan, he was great at Creighton, and they did have more success. He did help get that team all the way to an Elite Eight, but we're going to try to remove those factors from the equation and just talk about what Ryan would need to do to have had a more impactful 2-year career at Gonzaga than Andrew. And it'll be easier to compare the two of them because they will have both spent the same amount of time at Gonzaga because we know Ryan's got one more year of eligibility, and so this is going to be it for him. Statistically, Ryan already had a better season in terms of points, rebounds, assists than Andrew ever did at Gonzaga. And I say that not to necessarily say that Ryan's already better than Andrew or that he's already made a bigger impact. That's not the case here. It's context matters. And obviously Andrew was on different teams than Ryan was on last year's team. And I think that that impacts those influences. But for Ryan, he averaged 12.5 points last year. He averaged 6.9 assists and 4 rebounds. Literally in Andrew's 2 years, he never hit those totals. Never averaged more than 12 points a game. Never averaged 6.9 assists. Never averaged more than, I think, 3.5 rebounds per game. Andrew shot 32.3% from 3 in his first season at Gonzaga. 32.3. I bring this up because Ryan shot 32.1% last year. Basically identical. We know the struggles for Ryan, particularly earlier in the season, got a lot hotter in the second half of the year, really kind of found that outside shot in a way that Gonzaga really needed him to. But for Ryan, if he can expand on that, like his brother did, shoot 37, 38, 39, 40+% from three in his senior season. That's a huge benefit for Gonzaga. It also helps him from that legacy perspective. If we assume his numbers otherwise are going to be similar, 12+ points, 6+ assists, 4+ rebounds, he will have had 2 seasons that are statistically more impactful than anything Andrew did statistically at Gonzaga. He will have also had that 3-point percentage bump if he's able to do that. But looking at accolades, I think, is where you're going to have to kind of figure out how this conversation goes. Accolades, as well as, of course, how far he leads Gonzaga. And I think that's the part of the conversation that the majority of people are going to base comparing these two legacies off of. Because Andrew was 2-time All-WCC. Ryan very likely is going to do that as well, barring a very disastrous senior season for him. Andrew was a WCC tournament MVP. Wouldn't shock me if Ryan finds a way to do that this year, although I don't think that one particular award over a 3-game stretch or 2-game stretch is going to necessarily move the needle too dramatically in terms of comparing their legacies. So I think for Ryan, if he has a similar statistical performance to last year, if he makes an All-WCC team, first team, which he probably will, then the legacies are going to look pretty similar. Both 2-time All-WCC, both fairly similar statistically, although Ryan likely will have an edge in that regard. So the question becomes, what does he need to do in terms of leading this team? Because Andrew was part of a Sweet 16 team as a senior, the team that lost to Arkansas in that 2022 season. He was also part of a team that went to a national championship. Now, Andrew came off the bench for half of that season. In fact, he won WCC sixth man of the year, which is not an award that Ryan is going to win. So I think that's just not really relevant to the conversation, but it does highlight that Andrew's role was so different as a freshman in his first year at Gonzaga than Ryan's first year at Gonzaga. So that makes comparing them a little bit harder. I don't think it's fair to say Ryan has to take Gonzaga to a national championship game to equal Andrew Nembhard's legacy. In fact, if Ryan leads Gonzaga to a national championship game, he almost certainly passes Andrew's legacy, almost certainly. I think if he leads them to a Final Four, he does it. And yes, you could say, well, Andrew also, but he didn't lead that team. Jalen Suggs led that team. And I guess that there is a possibility that we run into a similar situation this year where, like, maybe Caleb Battle goes completely insane and plays, 32, 35 minutes a game, scores 17 points a game, and him and Nolan Hickman are the leaders, and Ryan kind of takes more of a back seat. I don't think that's particularly likely. I think there's a reality where Gonzaga gets the national championship game and Ryan isn't necessarily the catalyst. And in that situation, maybe we have a conversation, but it's hard for me to imagine Ryan, if he leads a team that far, not having a bigger impact on this team than Andrew had on the team that went to the national championship in 2021. Again, because of personnel differences, not really because of comparing their skill sets straight across. So if Ryan leads Gonzaga to a Final Four, he definitely passes Andrew's legacy. If he leads them to an Elite Eight and is better statistically across his 2 seasons, then I think probably. It's if they go back to the Sweet 16 and they don't make it further than that, and Ryan doesn't win WCC Player of the Year. In that case, I think they're fairly similar. Ryan will probably have more statistical impact, but that's because his role was different. Whereas if he didn't lead them any farther than Andrew did or than Andrew was a part of, then I think it gets a little bit murkier in terms of who you would actually kind of take or who you would say had the better career. I think Andrew's a better player. And again, that's not a knock on Ryan. Andrew's really, really good. But I think that if you're just talking legacies, it does kind of depend on how far Ryan takes this team and how he does statistically this season, of course, is going to play a role as well. Second question here comes from Grand Chef Otto on Discord, who says, we hear a lot of chatter about realignment moves that could hurt Gonzaga's chances of making it into the Big 12, Big East, or another prestigious conference. Is there any kind of shakeup that would help the Zags make that jump? Well, if we're just talking purely about Gonzaga getting into another conference, getting into a power conference, the biggest shakeup that could happen that would result in that would be something happening to the WCC imploding, falling apart, something like that. That's probably not going to land Gonzaga in another conference in a particularly good environment. Like, they'd be desperate. You'd see them have to cut a deal that they don't want to cut, not get the amount of money that they want. Same thing that kind of happened to Stanford and Cal when they go to the ACC. They're not getting the kind of money that they wanted, that they hoped, that they expected, because they were just desperate to join a new conference. Now, the WCC imploding is extremely unlikely. They've built themselves a really solid foundation. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. I don't think the WCC falling apart and then Gonzaga leaving is how it would go. It would go the opposite way. Gonzaga would leave, and that would lead to something bad happening to the WCC, which, by the way, I don't think will happen. If Gonzaga leaves, I think the WCC will be fine. I think that's why they're making some of the moves that they're making right now, is to maintain in a post-Gonzaga world. So that's the obvious answer. Other than that, I do think there are some things that could potentially result in it. I just think you look at some of the dominoes that might fall. It's easy to see a reality where those things happening wouldn't be good for Gonzaga, but it doesn't mean necessarily that there isn't a way that it could also be beneficial for Gonzaga. For example, if the ACC crumbles and falls apart, and Clemson and Florida State go to the Big Ten or whatever, and you get the Big 12 gobbling up teams like Wake Forest and whomever, and the Big East tries to pull back Syracuse and Louisville and get some of those teams, I think it's possible if the Big East does try to get involved and try to bring back some of their old former members like Miami and Boston College and Syracuse and Louisville, maybe they then look to also expand westward, because they're already doing it. They're already expanding. Maybe they look to try to bring in somebody like Gonzaga to kind of sweeten the pot, to convince, hey, maybe this is going to be more appealing to Syracuse or Louisville, of like, hey, we're also adding this premier program on the West Coast. Maybe those programs are going to say, absolutely not. We don't want to now have to take a trip out to Spokane. This conference is already good enough basketball-wise. You don't need to add somebody else. I don't know what those conversations would necessarily look like. Same thing with the Big 12. If the Big 12 adds a few schools on the East Coast, if the Big 12 decides to keep expanding and just throws Oregon State and Washington State back into the mix, maybe they then say, you know what, let's just keep this train rolling. Let's get our basketball school back in here. Again, right now, the hinge with the Big 12 is that they don't really want to make any moves until they've kind of gotten settled with the 8 schools that they've brought in over the last 2 years. The ACC falling apart forces the Big 12 to make moves. They can't just sit there and watch all these teams get picked up by somebody else. So if the ACC falls apart and the Big 12 is forced to then continue to expand, that could actually be a good thing for Gonzaga. So I do think there are ways that this could be beneficial for Gonzaga. It's also just hard to predict exactly what is going to happen. Things that we might be saying now, hey, that's definitely not good news for Gonzaga, that may change, and vice versa. Things that we think, hey, that maybe this is going to be great for Gonzaga, might not be. It's really hard to know. That's the nature of the beast with college conference realignment. But I would say that the majority of updates we get don't seem like they're going to be beneficial for Gonzaga. But again, you never exactly know. And there are a few things that could happen that could result in positive things for the Zags. Well, will the increase in scholarships across college sports help or hurt Gonzaga? We're going to relitigate that conversation. We're going to talk about what those changes are, whether it could potentially lead into a resurgence of redshirting at the college level. All of that and more coming up in just a second. After I tell you all about today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because, folks, with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked on Zags podcast. And we are still going through Mailbag Monday here, folks. If you want to get involved in Mailbag Monday, as a reminder, join the Discord channel. Free to join. Link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. Just click that link. Get to join right in. 350 of us talking Gonzaga basketball. Join before the season. We'll get all sorts of fun conversations going on there. You can also email me, andypatton013@gmail.com. Also a reminder, folks, check out the other great shows on the Locked On Podcast Network, including Locked On College Basketball. Myself, 2 to 3 episodes a week. You'll hear me on there. My co-host, Isaac Shade of Locked On Tar Heels. We're talking all things college basketball. If you want to hear how other schools in the power conferences are doing, you want to hear about mid-major transfer portal stuff, that is Monday's episode. Definitely check that out. We got some Michael Ajayi and Caliph Battle conversation on that episode, all waiting for you in your feeds. All right, 3 questions in this segment, all from Jeff via Gmail, all talking about the new rules in college athletics pertaining to scholarship limits effectively being removed, where you're going to have over 100 scholarship spots for football. You're going to have an increase from 13 to 15 in men's and women's basketball. You got a massive increase in scholarships in baseball and softball and volleyball, various other sports. Jeff's first question is a simple one. He said, I missed it when it was originally said, but when are the new sports scholarship levels going to take effect? That is the 25-26 school year. So not this upcoming year, but the following year. Gonzaga will go from having 13 scholarships for men's and women's basketball to 15. That'll be the jump there. They'll also be allowed to use partial scholarships, which means a player could be put on a half scholarship where they pay for 50% of their tuition, 30%, whatever it may be. That has historically been true in all sports except football and men's and women's basketball. Those were considered headcount sports, where if you were on scholarship, it is a 100% full ride scholarship. Whereas in baseball and other sports, you could be put on partial scholarships. That is changing now. All student athletes are subject to potentially being put on partial scholarships, which is a good thing. And you could view it as a bad thing, but it's not necessary. It's generally considered a good thing, where players like walk-ons might be able to get partial scholarships now, as opposed to just, hey, it's either all or nothing in that situation. Next question from Jeff. He says, in some ways, the new scholarship limits appear to be another way for power conferences to stockpile and consolidate talent and further claim their dominance. How effective could that really be in the long run? Because most players want to play when they come to college. Take baseball or softball, for example. Why would someone choose to go to the likes of USC or Washington only to sit on the bench and not play for 1 or 2 years, when that same player could go to Gonzaga or San Diego and start and play right away? I mean, this happens in all sports. Right. I mean, I know you use baseball as an example because of the dramatic increase in scholarships. I think baseball is going from 11.5 scholarships to like 34. It's a huge jump. So I understand why that's the example, but players go to Kansas and don't play. You know, Bill Self very famously plays like 7, maybe 8 guys. He's as stringent with his rotation as any coach in the country, including Mark Few. And yet there are like 11, 12, 13 guys on Kansas's roster. There are high profile top 50 recruits who are on Kansas's bench. Same with Duke. Same with North Carolina. Like that happens at every high major program. It happens in football. There's 5 stars on Alabama's bench who don't see the field for a year or two. And I think the transfer portal actually makes you more comfortable doing that. And I think a part of it is simple. Players are not going to Washington or USC in this example to be the 4th or 5th outfielder. They're going to compete to start. The coaching staff is not telling them you're going to be our fifth outfielder guaranteed. You're going to be a reliever and you're never going to be a starting pitcher. In basketball, you're going to be our third string guard and we're not anticipating more than 5 minutes a game. I think coaching staffs, the levels of honesty vary coaching staff to coaching staff, but I think generally they give every player a chance to compete. And so for Mark Few and co, like they're telling the players like, hey, we want you to come in and compete for this role. Like they didn't tell Emmanuel Innocente, like, hey, we really don't envision you being part of the rotation in year 1. Necessarily. I think that they, expressed to him who's on the roster, where they kind of see some of that stuff laying, but they say, this is the role we envision you filling. This is the talent that you have and what we want to see from you. We want to see you be somebody who can connect the offense as a passer and do these various things, but they're not telling him you're not going to play it all in year 1. Obviously, they did have that conversation with Braden Smith, and we'll talk about that in the next question. But I think that the idea that players are choosing to go to power programs to be 4th or 5th outfielders when they could go to Gonzaga and start is a fallacy, because they're not choosing to go to those programs to be a 4th or 5th outfielder. They're choosing to go to those programs to compete, to start and play a significant role right away. And then if they don't fill that role, they either choose to stay because they are connected to the coaching staff, they have friends on the team, they have a new boyfriend or girlfriend, they just like the school. There's a ton of different factors in terms of why they might stay. Or now, especially in the last 4 years, they choose to leave and they enter the transfer portal and they try it again. They try to find somewhere else. And an added amount of scholarships, I don't think really changes that all that dramatically. Players are still going to go try to play for the best programs, and they're still going to identify USC or UW or Oregon or whomever as the better programs than a Gonzaga or a San Diego. Conference affiliation matters. Playing in the Big Ten, playing in the ACC, which is weird to say about Stanford or Cal, but like playing at a higher conference level than the WCC still matters. Players might choose to take on a smaller role at a school that they think they're going to get more exposure. They're going to be on TV more. They're going to be in front of more scouts, as opposed to the WCC. Whether we agree with that argument that those players are making is a different conversation, but I think that's generally what is happening. And I think the increase in scholarships doesn't really change that. A player now gets a full ride to UW or a full ride offer to USC. And yeah, maybe this player who's a projected fourth or fifth outfielder is only getting offered a half scholarship at UW, whereas Gonzaga is offering a full scholarship. And in that situation, maybe that is an advantage for Gonzaga. Maybe that does result in players choosing to come to Gonzaga who says, hey, we see you as somebody who's going to play right away. You're going to get ABs right away. You're going to be on a full scholarship. We expect you to start at first base or compete to start here. Whereas at USC, they're saying, hey, we expect you to compete. And if you play well, you're going to play, but we're only offering you a 30% scholarship or a 60% scholarship or whatever it is. That could change the tides in favor of Gonzaga. So I do see it potentially working, but I think the overall argument of why would they go to this school? That's been happening for decades. That's not changing, I don't think, with the new scholarship limits. Final question here from Jeff. He says, could the increase in scholarship limits also lead to significant increases in redshirt years? The use of redshirt years used to be a common practice in college sports, but have largely disappeared in recent years, but perhaps the increased scholarship limits will change that. I think yes, but I don't think in a way that is going to seem all that significant. And what I mean by that, Graydon Lemke is a perfect example. For those of you who missed this last week, Graydon Lemke, 6'11" high schooler from Las Vegas. He is committed to Gonzaga. He is a preferred walk-on. He will be joining the team this year. 6'11", averaged 17 points a game in Las Vegas. Very, very talented high school player. He grew a bunch in high school, went from 6'2" to 6'11". He had a significant injury. I believe it was a Achilles injury that cost him an entire year in high school. That's why he wasn't super highly recruited. Graydon Lemke is not going to be on scholarship this year because Gonzaga has all 13 scholarships full. Next year, I think he probably will be. If this had happened a year later, Graydon Lemke would have been put on scholarship and then he would have redshirted. He's not expected to play this year for Gonzaga. So in that situation, Graydon Lemke, again, in an alternate reality where this rule went into effect this year, would be a redshirt for Gonzaga, the same way that Braden Smith is a redshirt for Gonzaga. Now, again, walk-ons can redshirt. Joaquim Reyes-Moore was on the roster last year. He didn't play. That counts as a redshirt year. He still has 4 years of eligibility. But I don't think we traditionally think of those the way that we would think of a scholarship player redshirting. So I think we'll see an increase in those, but I don't know if that really kind of counts in the spirit of this conversation. In terms of whether we'll see more Braden Smiths or players in the past like Kelly Olynyk who redshirted, I don't think so. I think the transfer portal has forever altered the likelihood of that happening. It doesn't mean it won't happen ever. Obviously, Braden Smith is doing it this year for Gonzaga, but that's a confluence of factors. He wanted to return home. He's from Seattle. He got convinced by the coaching staff to do that. It's very clear cut that he's going to be the starting point guard next year with Nembhard and Hickman and Battle all out of eligibility after this year. There's a certain amount of factors that went into that perfectly lining up for Gonzaga, but most players aren't going to choose to do that. So I don't think we're going to see more of it as long as the transfer portal rules stay as unruly, for lack of a better word, as they are currently. I think it maybe slightly increases the amount of red shirts, but it'll be more red shirts like the way Graydon Lemke is likely going to be a red shirt as opposed to more Braden Smiths and Kelly Olynyks. Well, the Olympics, folks, they're still rolling along. And we're going to talk about which Zags are likely to take home a medal this month and which Zags might be taking home a gold. All that coming up in just a second. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. We all love sports. That's why we're listening to sports podcasts here in August, but we don't ever want them to stop. However, it's the dog days of summer. We don't have a lot of games. The sports are not sportsing like we want them to. FanDuel does, however, let me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up the bets anytime I'm in a mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. And folks, depending what time it is on Monday, Casey Bosch and Team Canada, they're 2.5-point favorites against Sunny Greinecker and Germany in the women's basketball 3-on-3 tournament. We're going to talk more about that, what is at stake in that contest. But if you're listening to this and you got time, definitely head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, segment 3, still Eddie Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We got one question left in today's show, and we're going to break down a lot of Olympic coverage along with it. This question comes from GU Big Rig on Discord, who says, so far in the Olympics, how would you assess the performances of Gonzaga-linked teams? How likely do you think it is that the medal teams could be USA, Canada, and Serbia so that all the medal teams have some sort of Gonzaga connection? Yeah, so let's break it down. We got 7 Olympians from 6 different teams. always, well, we'll say 8 Olympians from 7 different teams. We're going to count Mark Few as a coach with Team USA. So we got 7 different teams to talk about here and how they've done in the Olympics, where they're at currently. And then we'll talk about the likelihood of a Team USA, Canada, Serbia potential medal stand for the men's basketball side. So first, on the men's basketball side, you have Japan and Rui Hachimura. They were eliminated, unfortunately. They went 0-3. They lost to France, heartbreaking overtime game. That was really, really hard to watch. Rui did not play in their follow-up game, which was a loss to Brazil. 0-3 for Japan. They're out. This isn't unexpected. It's just sad. We feel bad for Rui. We know how talented he is, but just couldn't help will this team to a victory. They should have had one against France. It's unfortunate they didn't get that one, but hey, that is how it goes. Next up, Serbia, Filip Petrusev. They advanced. They went 2-1 in group play. They lost to the U.S., but they put the beat down on South Sudan and beat Puerto Rico as well. Petrusev himself has been great. He didn't play great against Team USA, but that was a challenging matchup for him. Everybody on that team, not named Nikola Jokic, did not play particularly well in that game, but Petrusev looked good in the other 2 games. They're going to face Australia on Tuesday, August 6th, in their first game in the quarterfinals, needing to win that game in order to advance. It's starting to be single elimination from this point forward. So I think Serbia has a great chance of medaling, and we'll talk about that. But Australia is a tough matchup, too. It's going to be kind of fun to see Nikola Jokic and Filip Petrusev against Jock Landale and the other Australian Gales playing over there for that team. FanDuel right now, the odds for Serbia to medal, by the way, plus 142. The odds for them to win gold, a little bit lower, plus 3,400 for the Serbians. Canada, you got Nembhard and Olenek, of course, on that roster. They advanced. They went 3-0. They beat Spain. They beat Australia. They beat Greece. They looked great. They looked great in their last couple of games. That game against Spain came a little closer than they wanted it to be, but they still secured a victory. Andrew Nembhard was excellent in that game. I think he had 19 points in that one. Really critical in the fourth quarter. He had back-to-back fast break lay-ins that he had. He had a couple mid-range shots, hit some threes. Just really excellent performance from him. Kelly has struggled. He just hasn't looked like himself. He's missed shots. He's been benched. They've been playing Dwight Powell a lot more at the 5. It's working better for Team Canada. It's sad for Kelly, but hey, he's been a catalyst for Team Canada for a decade now, and all he wants is to see this team medal, and he will do whatever he can to get them there. And if they get there, it'll be in large part because of his work over the last decade. So even if he's not a big contributor now, that doesn't mean that he hasn't been a huge part of this country's success. They look really likely to medal. They're playing great. Now they got France on Tuesday. France is going to be tough. It's a tough matchup for them with Rudy Gobert, with Victor Wembanyama in the front court. Canada's guards are much better than France's guards, much better. But they have to get through that monster in the front court. And if they don't, suddenly their odds, that's going to be a huge problem for them. So we'll see if they're able to do that again. That game is on Tuesday. The odds for them to medal right now are minus 146 on FanDuel. For them to win gold, plus 750. Team USA 3-0 advanced. They've just been dominant. People were concerned before the Olympics started, thought they weren't looking very good in the exhibition games. They were trying some things out, trying to experiment with some of the lineups. Once they get in the Olympic play, they have been just fine. They take on Brazil on Tuesday, August 6th. Right now, FanDuel's got them at minus 550 odds to take home the gold, and to medal overall is minus 5,000. So probably not worth throwing a lot of money down there, but you still feel good about them taking home the gold. Definitely check that out at FanDuel. Moving over to the women's side, Team Canada. For 5-on-5 women's basketball, they were eliminated, going 0-3. Yvonne Ejim did not play. She was on the roster in part as kind of a future addition for Canada's women's basketball senior national team going forward. So it wasn't a surprise she didn't play, but sad to see this team not get an opportunity to compete for a medal. And then on the 3-on-3 side, big matchup, Monday morning. Might be going on as you're listening to this, so definitely go check the schedule, see if you can catch some of this one. It is Casey Bosch, former Zag from 2015 to 2016. She is on Team Canada. They will take on Team Germany. Sunny Greiniker was a 2-time All-WCC contributor at Gonzaga from 2011 to 2014. They are facing each other on Monday morning. Like I said, Canada, they're still in it. They won a play-in game in order to stay in the competition as it got to the quarterfinal stage. They won 21-10 over Australia in a must-win game. Bosch led all scorers in that game with 9 points. She has not been, I think going into that game, she was had their fewest points per game. And she goes out and has a 9-point game, a monstrous performance when they desperately needed it. Really cool to see her put on that clutch and get that thing done for them. FanDuel odds to win gold for Team Canada in the 3-on-3 are plus 150, which is the highest odds. So we very reasonably could see a gold medal for Casey Bosch and the Canadians. And then Sonny Greinacher, they've been excellent all weekend long. Team Germany has. They beat Spain over the weekend, 18-15. Greinacher had 5 points and 2 boards in that one. FanDuel odds for them to win gold are plus 380. So a little bit lower. There's only 4 teams left. They are third among the highest odds. It's Canada at 1, Team USA second, Germany's third. I apologize. I can't remember who's fourth in that one, but we're seeing a real opportunity for Casey Bosch and Sonny Greinacher to take home at least medals. One of them might end up with the gold there, but we'll definitely likely see some medals for the two of them. Mark Few is going to take home a medal, almost certainly, probably a gold, but at least a medal. Whether we're going to see Team USA, Canada, and Serbia, I think it's possible. I think those are arguably the 3 best teams. I think France might be a little better than Serbia, but I think the issue is that France and Canada face each other first. So if Canada wins and France is eliminated, that obviously gives Canada some odds go up a lot. If they lose, they're done. But if Canada wins, beats France, then I think Canada's very, very, very likely to medal, whereas Serbia probably increases their chances a little bit. They got a tough Australian team. If they win that one, I think we're looking at a real possibility of seeing Mark Few have a medal, Andrew Nembhard and Kelly Olynyk having a medal, Filip Petrusev having a medal, Casey Bosch and Sonny Greinacher. We could end up seeing all of them get medals. I don't know if I'd be betting on every single one of them to medal necessarily, but hey, if you wanted to parlay that, maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's worth giving that a shot, seeing how that shakes out, because it'd be really fun to see a whole lot of hardware coming back to Spokane or representing Spokane and Gonzaga after these Olympic Games are over. Going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for sticking with us here in the off season in August as we continue to churn out 5 episodes a week. We're going to be down to 3 episodes a week starting in about a week. Last part of August, all of September, 3 episodes a week, but still going to be churning out lots of great content for you all. We're going to cover the rest of the Olympics for the next few weeks, continue to talk recruiting, continue to talk NBA Zags, how Anton Watson's doing. He's got a 2-way contract with the Boston Celtics. We'll talk more about that on a future episode. Get some fun guests for you lined up as well. Thanks again for listening, folks. And until next time, as always, go Zags.